Michael, the Fox Gallagher, Anthony Rourke, and Lenny Blade Burns, three names once whispered in Liverpool's darkest corners, now etched into the city's criminal history. What set this group apart was their ability to combine street violence with strategic thinking. They forged alliances with corrupt officials and local businesses, ensuring protection and silence. At the same time, they maintained a brutal reputation. Anyone who crossed them disappeared or suffered severe consequences. This mixture of fear and respect gave the Fox and his crew control over large parts of Toxteth and eventually beyond. Rumors swirled about how deeply the Mafia's reach extended, whispering of influence in city halls and police stations. Yet, no one could pin down the Fox's true identity. His secrecy added to his legend, making him almost untouchable. As Liverpool struggled to rebuild from economic decline, this emerging mafia quietly tightened its grip, setting the stage for a violent and lucrative criminal empire that would shape the city's future for generations. The summer of 1981 brought more than just heat to Liverpool. It ignited a firestorm that would forever change the city's criminal landscape. The Toxteth riots erupted after years of frustration boiled over, fueled by poverty, racial tension, and heavy-handed policing. For many residents, the unrest was a desperate cry for justice. But for the rising mafia, it was an unexpected opportunity. While the city burned, gangs seized control of the streets, and law enforcement found themselves overwhelmed and unable to maintain order. In the chaos, the Fox and his growing network expanded their influence. The riots created a power vacuum that allowed the mafia to operate with less fear of immediate police intervention. They moved quickly to recruit young, angry men from the neighborhoods, men who were eager for protection, money and respect in a world that had offered them little else. These recruits were trained not only to fight, but to carry out coordinated crimes, transforming small street gangs into disciplined crews. Armed robberies became more frequent and sophisticated. Banks were no longer just targets. They became symbols of the wealth the mafia wanted to control. The group orchestrated meticulously planned heists that struck fear into the community, but also brought in vast sums of money. Armored trucks, once seen as too risky, now became prime targets. Each successful robbery added to their reputation and resources, further cementing their control over Toxteth and spreading influence into neighboring areas. Despite the violence, the mafia presented themselves as protectors of the community. Some residents accepted their presence, seeing the group as a necessary evil in a city where official systems had failed them. Others feared them, knowing any challenge could lead to brutal retaliation. The lines between criminals and community leaders blurred, making it harder for the police to untangle the web. The Toxteth riots had not only exposed deep social divides, but had also unleashed a new era of crime. The chaos gave birth to a ruthless mafia that thrived in the cracks of a broken city, transforming Liverpool's underworld into a well-oiled machine. As the dust settled, it became clear that this was only the beginning, an era where violence, money, and power would clash in deadly ways. By the mid-1980s, Liverpool's authorities had begun to grasp the scale of the threat they were facing. The robberies were too clean, too frequent, and too widespread to be the work of random gangs. Surveillance increased, arrests followed, and the police launched targeted operations to dismantle the growing mafia. Several key figures within the Fox's network were captured, facing lengthy prison sentences. For a moment it seemed like law enforcement had the upper hand, but what came next would send shockwaves through the entire city. In one of the most audacious events in Liverpool's criminal history, the Fox orchestrated a prison break that stunned both the police and the public. Details of how it was pulled off remain unclear, but insiders hinted at bribed guards, forged documents, and a tunnel dug over months beneath the prison walls. Others believed the escape was aided by international contacts. However it happened, the result was the same. The Fox vanished without a trace, just days before his trial. Panic spread among the authorities, while on the streets, his legend grew. His escape wasn't just about freedom. It was a statement. It showed the mafia's reach extended far beyond Toxteth. It had infiltrated the very institutions meant to stop them. With renewed confidence, and no longer confined by walls, the fox reorganized his network from the shadows. He shifted the structure of the group, making it more secretive and harder to penetrate. Orders flowed through layers of trusted lieutenants, making it nearly impossible to track their origin. The escape proved to be more than a getaway. It was a turning point. The gang was no longer a loud, visible force causing chaos in the streets. It had evolved into something far more dangerous, a silent empire growing in the shadows, and with their leader free and more determined than ever, Liverpool's Mafia entered its next and most calculated phase. Under the direction of the Fox, now operating entirely in the shadows, the Mafia formed secret alliances with dock workers, customs officials and shipping agents. These weren't always forced partnerships. Many were willing participants, lured by the promise of easy money. Hidden compartments were built into cargo containers. Stolen goods, weapons, and most importantly, drugs began arriving through Liverpool's port undetected. Containers marked for routine inspection were either waved through or quietly diverted. The city's forgotten docks had become a gateway for international crime. The scale of the operation was staggering. At first it was smaller items, stolen electronics, counterfeit clothes, untaxed cigarettes. But soon, cocaine shipments from South America and heroin from Asia began flowing in with disturbing regularity. Liverpool transformed from a distribution point to a key European transit hub. The profits soared. Each shipment could generate millions, and the gang's influence spread beyond the streets and into boardrooms, shipping firms, and international markets. This chapter in the Mafia's rise was marked by a shift in tone. They no longer needed brute force to assert dominance. With control over the docks, they held something far more powerful: control of supply. Rival gangs began paying for access. Local dealers became dependent on their shipments. Even groups in other UK cities had to negotiate with them. The Mafia had gone global without ever leaving Liverpool. But this expansion came with new risks. International law enforcement agencies began taking notice. Surveillance increased. Informants emerged. Yet the operation was so well insulated, with so many layers of cutouts and false leads, that arrests rarely reached anyone important. The Fox had turned Liverpool's past into his future, using a city built on trade to smuggle his way into the highest ranks of the underworld. And still, no one could catch him. By the early 1990s, the Mafia's grip on Liverpool was no longer just about power, it was about profit, and nothing brought in more money than drugs. Cocaine, heroin, and ecstasy flooded the streets, turning the city into a thriving drug marketplace. What began as a carefully controlled operation through the docks spiraled into something much harder to manage. With so much money on the line, trust within the organization began to erode, and rival factions sensed weakness. The drug trade, once their greatest asset, was now the source of deadly conflict. At first, the Mafia maintained order through fear. Street-level dealers paid a cut to operate, and those who refused were swiftly dealt with. But as younger, more ambitious gangs emerged, some from within Liverpool, others from Manchester and London, the balance began to shift. These new groups weren't interested in negotiating. They wanted territory, they wanted control, and they were willing to spill blood to get it. What followed was a brutal and unrelenting turf war. Shootings became a near-daily occurrence in some neighborhoods. Families were caught in the crossfire. Schools and parks became crime scenes. Liverpool streets turned into battlegrounds, and the old code of silence began to crack as terrified residents called for help. The police ramped up efforts, but every arrest seemed to open the door for another violent player to step in. Inside the Mafia, paranoia grew. The Fox remained elusive, issuing orders through trusted intermediaries, but even his reach had limits. Lieutenants who had once been loyal began turning on each other, vying for control of the most lucrative corners of the city. Some aligned themselves with rival gangs for protection. Others disappeared entirely, presumed dead or silenced to prevent betrayal. The violence attracted national attention. Newspapers labeled Liverpool as Britain's drug capital. Politicians promised change. But beneath the surface, the chaos only served to hide the deeper structure that remained intact. The mafia hadn't collapsed. It had splintered, and while the headlines focused on street warfare, the real business continued behind closed doors, untouched and still thriving. The drug war left scars that would never fully heal. It shattered communities, reshaped alliances, and forever changed the way the mafia operated. From this bloodshed, a darker, more secretive underworld began to form, one that no longer needed visibility to wield power. As the violence escalated and the body count rose, police investigators working Liverpool's underworld began to notice something strange. Key operations were being quietly dismantled before they could even begin. Shipments disappeared. Arms deals fell through. Safe houses were compromised. It wasn't luck or missteps. Someone inside the mafia was leaking information. And whoever it was, they weren't careless. They were precise, methodical, and always one step ahead. The police gave the source a codename, Shadow. For years, Shadow operated in complete secrecy. Even among officers, only a handful knew of the informant's existence. This wasn't just a street-level snitch. Shadow had access to high-level plans, financial routes, offshore accounts, and smuggling details no outsider could have known. It became clear that this was someone close to the top, perhaps even a founding member. The information they provided led to dozens of arrests, the seizure of millions in assets, and the collapse of entire drug routes. And still, the mafia had no idea who was betraying them. Inside the organization, paranoia consumed everything. Meetings were shortened, phones were destroyed, loyalty tests became common. The Fox, still hiding from the law, allegedly sanctioned a wave of internal purges. Trusted lieutenants disappeared overnight. Brothers turned on each other. Rumors spread like wildfire. Anyone could be Shadow, yet no matter how many they silenced, the leaks continued. The tension reached its peak when a major cocaine shipment from South America, valued at nearly £30 million, was intercepted before it even touched UK soil. That was the moment the mafia realized they were bleeding from the inside. The financial hit was massive, but the psychological blow was even worse. For the first time, the Fox's empire seemed vulnerable, not from outside attacks, but from betrayal within. The identity of Shadow was never officially revealed. Some believed it was a senior figure who faked their death. Others claimed it was more than one person. Whispers even suggested the Fox himself had turned informant, trading pieces of his empire for immunity, though no proof ever surfaced. What is known is that Shadow dismantled the mafia's illusion of invincibility. Trust, once their strongest weapon, had become their greatest weakness. And in the world of organized crime, that's when empires begin to fall. In the aftermath of betrayal and internal collapse, Liverpool's mafia faced a crossroads. Many believed the empire would crumble completely, but instead of fading, it evolved. The remaining leadership recognized that local control was no longer enough. To survive and thrive, they needed to go bigger. The answer lay thousands of miles away, deep in the jungles of Colombia and the mountains of Mexico. It was there, among the world's most powerful drug cartels, that Liverpool's criminals found new partners, new profits, and a dangerous new path forward. The mafia's existing smuggling infrastructure made them ideal allies for the Latin American cartels looking to expand into Europe. They had access to ports, experience with customs corruption, and a proven distribution network across the UK. In exchange, the cartels offered something the mafia couldn't resist: direct access to pure, uncut cocaine at a fraction of the cost. The deal was struck in silence, through encrypted channels and meetings held offshore. And just like that, Liverpool became a key European gateway for South American cocaine. Shipments arrived in containers hidden among legitimate goods: frozen meat, electronics, textiles. Some were routed through Spain, and Shadow dismantled the mafia's illusion of invincibility. Trust, once their strongest weapon, had become their greatest weakness. And in the world of organized crime, that's when empires begin to fall. In the aftermath of betrayal and internal collapse, Liverpool's Mafia faced a crossroads. Many believed the empire would crumble completely, but instead of fading, it evolved. The remaining leadership recognized that local control was no longer enough. To survive and thrive, they needed to go bigger. The answer lay thousands of miles away, deep in the jungles of Colombia and the mountains of Mexico. It was there, among the world's most powerful drug cartels, that Liverpool's criminals found new partners, new profits, and a dangerous new path forward. The Mafia's existing smuggling infrastructure made them ideal allies for the Latin American cartels looking to expand into Europe. They had access to ports, experience with customs corruption, and a proven distribution network across the UK. In exchange, the cartels offered something the Mafia couldn't resist: direct access to pure, uncut cocaine at a fraction of the cost. The deal was struck in silence, through encrypted channels and meetings held offshore. And just like that, Liverpool became a key European gateway for South American cocaine. Shipments arrived in containers hidden among legitimate goods: frozen meat, electronics, textiles. Some were routed through Spain and the Netherlands to mask their origin. Local gangs handled street-level distribution, but the Mafia kept control over the logistics, taking a cut from every deal. Profits soared into the tens of millions, and a new generation of criminals, young, sharp, and globally connected, emerged to manage the operations. But with this new scale came new dangers. The cartels were ruthless, and any sign of weakness was punished without hesitation. One missed payment, one intercepted shipment, could mean death. Liverpool's gangsters were no longer dealing with rivals they could threaten or intimidate. They were now answerable to syndicates that viewed human life as disposable. Several bodies turned up in the Mersey over the following years, wrapped in plastic, shot execution style. These weren't local disputes, they were cartel warnings. For over 2 decades, the Fox remained a ghost, an untouchable figure whose name still commanded fear across Liverpool. His fingerprints were nowhere, his voice rarely heard, and yet his presence was felt in every major deal, every high-level meeting, and every decision that shaped the underworld. But in the early 2010s, the walls finally began to close in. Years of careful investigation, international cooperation, and digital surveillance revealed patterns that no one had seen before. The myth of the Fox was about to be broken by something he had never planned for: data. The breakthrough came from an encrypted phone network used by the Mafia and their cartel contacts. When authorities cracked the system, they uncovered years' worth of messages, voice notes, and GPS data. The trail didn't lead to a violent enforcer or flashy dealer. It led to a man living under a false identity in southern Spain. He lived in a private villa, paid in cash, and rarely left without armed protection. But when Spanish police raided the property, they found him alone, sitting at a desk surrounded by burner phones and ledgers. After decades on the run, the Fox had finally been caught. His arrest shocked Liverpool. Many believed he was dead. Others thought he had retired long ago. But now, the face behind the legend was revealed. An unassuming man in his 60s, calm and composed even as officers led him away. He said nothing during transport, and very little during interrogation. His silence continued through trial, where prosecutors laid out decades of evidence, bank records, intercepted communications, testimonies from former allies. He was sentenced to life without parole. But his fall did more than put one man behind bars. The trial revealed the full scope of the Mafia's influence. Names surfaced: politicians, business owners, even police officers who had been compromised. Assets were seized, accounts frozen, properties auctioned off. The empire cracked at the foundations. Power struggles erupted among those who remained. For the first time in years, Liverpool's underworld was in disarray. The Fox's downfall marked the end of an era. But while one kingpin was gone, the vacuum he left behind opened the door for something even more unpredictable: the rise of new players with no loyalty, no history, and nothing to lose. In the years following the Fox's imprisonment, Liverpool's criminal world didn't collapse, It adapted. The old guard was gone, but a new generation stepped in. One that had grown up watching the rise and fall of the mafia with sharp eyes and smarter tools. These weren't hardened men from the streets. They were younger, quieter, and far more connected to technology. They understood that power no longer came from fear alone. It came from data, encryption, and staying invisible. The new wave of criminals didn't need to carry guns or meet in dark alleys. Deals were made over encrypted messaging apps, using cryptocurrency for transactions, and digital marketplaces hidden on the dark web. Bitcoin wallets replaced briefcases of cash. GPS tracking on shipments was replaced by real-time blockchain monitoring. They studied cybersecurity, hired hackers, and moved faster than the authorities could trace. It was organized crime 2.0. At the center of this digital transformation was a group known only by its encrypted initials. No one knew who led it, but it operated across multiple cities and countries. Instead of violence, it used manipulation, bribing app developers, compromising shipping software, and even planting insiders inside tech firms. Drug shipments were now coordinated through codes disguised in social media posts and gaming platforms. Traditional surveillance methods failed, police were chasing ghosts. But while the methods changed, the ambition remained the same. The new generation wanted control, not just over drugs, but over information. They hacked into police databases, leaked competitor locations, and blackmailed businessmen. They didn't just smuggle cocaine, they owned the routes. And they weren't afraid to work with whoever paid the most, even rival groups or former enemies. Despite their secrecy, cracks began to show. One member was arrested after a routine traffic stop led to a laptop full of incriminating data. Another disappeared, presumed dead, after trying to branch off independently. The rules were looser now, and loyalty meant little. Without a central figure like the Fox, power shifted constantly. Betrayals were common, alliances changed overnight. Still, this digital mafia kept Liverpool on the map, not through headlines or shootouts, but through quiet dominance. The faces were different, the weapons were keyboards, but the legacy of crime endured. Only now, it was harder to see, and even harder to stop. Today, Liverpool looks different on the surface. The docks have been redeveloped. The skyline has grown, and the city has become a symbol of cultural revival. But beneath the progress, shadows still move. The legacy of organized crime remains deeply rooted, its influence woven into parts of the city that many never see. The violence has lessened, and the headlines are fewer. But those who know the streets understand. Liverpool's mafia never truly disappeared. It simply evolved. Law enforcement continues to battle what remains, but the fight has changed. The old networks have fractured into smaller, more agile cells. These groups operate quietly, using technology to mask their moves, laundering money through crypto, online gambling, and legitimate businesses. Unlike their predecessors, they avoid the spotlight. There are no flashy cars, no public threats, just silent operations, careful planning, and a deep understanding of the system they exploit. Meanwhile, the scars of the past remain. Communities once ravaged by drug wars still struggle with addiction and poverty. Families who lost loved ones during the turf wars still wait for justice. Some former enforcers have turned to legal work, consulting on security or speed.